Practice makes perfect, the idiom that we refer to in playing music, practicing a sport, or preparing for a presentation, is also appropriate for my topic of sewing. Practicing on small samples is a great way to rehearse for bigger projects. In this final episode of Applique Know-How, I'll share 5 unique applique techniques, starting with bold and bias. The use of fusible bias tape is often incorporated in quilting designs, yet you might not feel confident sewing a larger project without first knowing how. Stay tuned, I'll give you practice pointers next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Sewing Cabinets, hand-built in the USA by American craftsmen, customized for you. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
Throughout this series, I've been working with just one simple design, using it over and over again for the samples. We started off with working with paperback fusible web just to learn the basic applique techniques. And this simple leaf design, you can trace with paperback fusible web, tracing the shape on the leaf, fusing this to fabric, and then cutting out along the lines and removing so that you have a sticky surface to press onto fabric. We have created many obviously different looks using this applique treatment, and today the bold and bias has 1/4 of an inch pre-made bias tape as well as 1/8 of an inch bias tape. The details aren't as exacting as we had earlier with all the little veins in the leaf, but definitely you have a bold look, a stained glass effect. To create this, we're working with the 1/4 of an inch and 1/8 of an inch pre-made tape, and it has a release paper along the back of it. So you remove it, it's just that web once again, and because it's biased, you can mold and shape it along the curves. I have the same applique started on this little sample, little square, and then the heart, and you can see I've started to turn corners. I've already released the paper backing from the area. And you always start with the applique in the background and then work toward the foreground. Use a small iron if you have one, and I'm using this mini iron, which works out really well. And pressing, it's a dry heat. I can press this into place. It's just a temporary positioning tool. But to turn corners, I like to press to slightly beyond the edge and then fold the bias back on itself. Use a stiletto or a pin and hold the outer corner. And then you're going to shape this. Notice how when you shape it, it forms a corner, and you get a 45-degree angle at this point. Pins and stilettos and fingernails work great for positioning at this point. And now I'm pressing to the heart area, and we'll just trim right next to the applique. To work with the heart, I'm going to decide to start at the crest of the heart and remove the paper, and I've already cut the angle, as you can see here, kind of to look much like the angle of the heart, and because this is bias, you'll see how well it shapes. Now I'm going to have to turn this to make it a little easier for me to shape, but I will turn it and then just press and mold, just kind of work together as this goes around. If by chance you don't like what you've pressed down, just reheat it and it will release just using the stiletto or a pin. Again, at the point, I'm going to place the point of my stiletto, and here it's a sharper corner, so I'm just going to kind of manipulate this until I like what I see. If you have very detailed shapes, perhaps you may want to soften the applique. This works out great for just somewhat soft shapes and angles. And as I get to the crest, I would then cut the fusible bias so that it was to the correct shape. Now for stitching. You may think you're going to do double stitching, but really one roll will do it. And if you use a multiple step zigzag, as this sample shows, you can stitch right down the middle of the tape. Here I'm stitching using a 3.5 to 4-point width along the wide bias tape. At the corners, I try to stop with the needle in the outside corner for easy pivoting. Now, if you're changing the bias width for inner details, you're going to have to change the width, of course, of your stitch, obviously. 2.0 to 2.5 will do it for a zigzag or a multiple step zigzag. It's a quick way and a dramatic way to create an applique. Most of the applique techniques that I've shown you so far have featured embellishments along the edges. This applique switches the emphasis away from the stitching and centers the focal point to the multifaceted design. Appliques with numerous pieces are stunning, yet getting all the pieces precisely stacked can be tricky. I'll share with you my stacking techniques. It's easy when you know how. We'll work with this applique that has 4 or 5 pieces, I guess only 4, and rather than fusing the pieces directly on the fabric, I like to use a pressing sheet to do the positioning. In the workbook that accompanies the program, you will get the layout of this little design as well as the pieces separated so that you trace these pieces onto the paperback fusible web and fuse these pieces onto whatever fabric color you'd like to use. Or you can use your favorite multi-layered or stacked design to try this practice technique. I mentioned I like to build the applique pieces on a pressing sheet. That way you can kind of reposition if you'd like to. And you can use a light table if needed. I'm not using a light table right now, but here you can see that I have placed the basic leaf and then the inner detail, and then would position this one. And then since this leaf goes off the side, and I'll kind of reference my little design again, I can position it and then press. Now, if you didn't like the way this looked, you can reposition, because this Teflon type of product, you can just lift this off and reposition. So that's what I like to use, a pressing sheet with the multi-layers. And the backing or the stickiness is still there, so that then you can fuse this to your fabric as one unit. It just works better to position it in its entirety and then press. I have a stabilizer on the underside, a tearaway stabilizer, and then to set up for stitching so that it's predominant, I like to use 2 threads. The threads are positioned so that one is unwinding from the top and the other is unwinding from the lower edge. I'm using rayon thread, and then would work with a top stitching needle. My stitch length is, it's just a straight stitch, is a little bit longer, 3.5 to 4, but I'm not using 4 because of the short little pieces, too difficult to turn. And then the tension, loosen the tension to about 3. So to stitch, it's easy. Because we have worked with a fusible web, this piece, the fabric is positioned and somewhat fused into place, or it is fused in place, but stabilized into place. And then I'm just stitching about 1/8 of an inch inside. Now as I get to this outside curve, I may shorten the stitch to 3.0 so that I can curve this a little bit better. And then you can see I have long thread tails. These long thread tails are going to come in handy next. Now that I'm done in this section, I'm going to cut the thread with long thread tails so that I can bring these thread tails to the underside. Using a self-threading needle, one of my favorites to use because I have a little trouble seeing all this, and hopefully I can do it here without my glasses. I'll just thread the eye of the needle with the self-threading and pull to the underside and tie a knot. And by doing this, I tie a knot, and a few minutes later you can see you can have the detailed stitching, the multifaceted applique, and the top stitching as a focal point. Dig through your button box and gather a handful of complementary buttons for this next applique know-how variation. Big, small, or in between, buttons can enhance a simple applique. I'll show you how to sew buttons on by machine to save time. It's really an easy process. Sewing doesn't have to be difficult. Putting on buttons is simple, and combining them with an applique is ideal. You can fuse on the applique background fabrics. We've used a scalloped edge, rotary cutter, or scissors to cut the heart shape. We fringed the square fabric and then just glue sticked it into place. And then you can see possibly in the background we have the straight stitching, just the way I stitched around the edges in our last applique know-how technique. but the buttons really are the showcase element of this. And to position the buttons, we use two techniques. First, to pin them into place, if you can call it that, and then to do the sewing. The pinning is done with a craft glue stick, just a paper glue stick that you would add a little glue to the back of the button, position into place, and let it dry a little bit. Now, as far as the setting, my machine has a setting that will sew on buttons, so I have selected that, or you could use a bar tack and a 0 stitch length, or a zigzag and a 0 stitch length would be needed. So you can just set that machine accordingly, but then do test. I have the foot that's recommended to sew on buttons, and then I'm going to position it over the openings, but don't just sew at this point. Turn the wheel by hand to make certain that the needle goes through the eyes, and of course I pre-tested that and it did, so then I just sew, let it bar tack, and this has a certain amount of stitches and you can see it locks at one side, and then I can just cut the threads and then move on to the next stitch, move the shank off the button and move on to the next one. So in about 10 seconds a piece you can add buttons to your applique for a real showstopper. You might make the case that a needle without thread is like a burger without fries. You need both components to make a whole. Although eating a hamburger without at least a few fries seems incomplete to me, a needle without thread is totally functional. Barbed needles are the key to felting layers of fabric, not for seaming, but for embellishing. This threadless applique technique is a creative fast, and even though the word is overused, a fun technique. This applique can take a mind of its own, or has a mind of its own, because as you look at the sample, you'll see that the heart-shaped leaf has changed, even though this original applique was the same size as we've been working with throughout this series. That's because we're felting, we're positioning the fabric, right, melding it into the background fabric. Whether you work with denim or silk shantung is what my sample is, or felt or any other wool, you're going to have totally different results, so do practice. We talked about threadless applique. Well, I'm using a machine that felts. That's all it does. Like a bread maker, it just does one thing and it does it well. This has 11 barbed needles. Some machines have 5. You can do hand felting that also has 5 needles, and it really is a creative tool. And as I mentioned, I have wool fabric, and then I have the heart and the rectangular applique are silk that have been positioned, not fused into place. And I'm going to first tack them down. Now when you tack it down, start in the center, because watch what happens to this flat fabric. It no longer is flat. And you can flatten it out if you'd like, and you can then move to the areas, just kind of move and shape. Now I kind of got a little out of shape here for this, so I'll simply release some of the stitching and you baste it down, and there we go. Now we're starting to get a leaf that's more contemporary in look. And now I'll do the square. And you don't have to clip threads, you can just move freely, and I'll work this into place. Now the sample had vines and stems made out of roving, and the roving is untwisted fiber, and you can twist it and then position it, and I'll raise my needles and kind of twist it down, and I like to position and then kind of twist as I'm going along. It takes a little time, but we'll just go along here and I'll keep twisting. And as you can see, this is not a permanent as for a seam, but it certainly is permanent for an embellishment. I would take a little bit more time than the few minutes I've done here today, and I would also add additional sections to it. I'd also add perhaps some more leaves or take some time, but you can see it has potential for a contemporary, very artsy look by sewing an applique without thread. Switch your way of thinking. Place the applique on the underside of the main fabric instead of on the top side. Reversing the applique position gives depth to the applique on wool, fleece, sweatshirt, fleece fabrics. The stitching is really simple, and the loft of the main fabric, when cut, adds dimension to the applique embellishment. This next applique know-how sample that you can make or follow along to create is great for beginner applique people because the fabric kind of hides a little bit of your stitching. The fabric that we have chosen is a wool and could be worked on sweatshirt fleece, as I mentioned, or fleece blankets. It's just a really simple application. Here's our little sample that we're working with, and on the underside we have placed the applique features, the two fabrics, to stack them, and then we have the stabilizer. But as I flip this around, I'm going to show you on the stabilizer we have the design drawn, the mirror image of the design. Here's a close-up of stitching along this design and just using a zigzag, or you could use a straight stitch, but keep in mind that some of those stitching could be camouflaged, which is great. And since I'm working with wool and natural fabrics, I've chosen, when my stitching, to work with the cotton thread, so you may want to consider that. This next sample has been stitched, and I've already cut the first layer, the top layer, because we're going to cut away the main fabric, and then with the scissors trim along this area. Now you can see when I expose what's underneath, you don't have to have it exact. I'm using a curved scissors, which helps. I can trim away the green fabric because I only want the dark green to show, and trim closely, but it's fast. And I can actually do a little bit more for you and just keep trimming and guiding it. And then what you could also do is trim away the excess fabric from the underside. We would tear away the stabilizer, and then you could, in reverse, trim this away. If this were a fleece blanket for someone in your family, you can have the fabric even on both sides. So this reversible fabric works really well with fleece, wool, and sweatshirt fabrics. Traditional quilters often create appliques with a turned under edge. Nimble fingers sew these appliques by hand and with precision. Sewing by hand is not one of my strong suits. If you share my penchant for using your sewing machine instead of hand stitching, you'll appreciate the next technique, a smooth finished applique. We're winding down our study of applique and making little samples of what can be done for an applique project. And this one, the edge is totally finished, no raw edges, and the blind hem stitch or blanket stitch with clear thread gives the illusion that it's been stitched on by hand. To have a turned under edge of an applique, I like to use a template that is cut the size of the applique, which we have here. You have a scrap of fabric, and then I would just trace the shape and the size of the template on the fabric. Now back the fabric with a tracing material. This is a pattern tracing material. It could be lightweight, now woven fabric. And you can see my stitching, a short stitch length, maybe 2.0, to stitch around the edges so that I would have right sides together. Then, without trimming, I don't like to trim just yet, you can cut the underside. You separate these apart and cut the webbing or the non-woven fabric, so later you can turn this right side up. But right now we're going to do some pressing. And my coworker Donna taught me this technique, and I use it so often. When you want to press small little areas, press it flat, pressing one side open or one side flat. So you can see I'm pressing just the peach heart fabric toward the inside. It's going to make it easier to trim. And this next sample that has been totally pressed, you can see at this point then I did trimming, roughly trimming around the edges and also trimming, leaving a little extra of the non-woven fabric. At the crest of the heart I clipped to that point so that I could easily turn. And now turn right side out. That short stitch length is really crucial at this point to make certain that you get smooth edges. And as I turn this out, you may want to find a bamboo creaser to move and shape the edges. Now I have a completed sample, and you can then press from the right side to make sure that that has a complete edge. Here at the sewing machine, I positioned the applique in place, and I am stitching using a blanket stitch or a blind hem stitch and clear thread. Notice the straight stitch goes around the edge of the fabric, and the zig goes into the applique for a hand-picked look. And there you have a turned under applique by machine. It's now time for the Nancy's Corner segment of our program, where I'm going to pass along an inspirational idea where you can become involved, and I'm seeing in a minute that you're going to want to be involved. I'd like to introduce you to Linda Wick. Linda is the originator and the creator of the Camel Quilt Project. Linda, what an inspirational story that you have started, and what great projects you create.
Thank you very much.
Now this is a camel quilt, and you can see camouflage fabric, compact, but it isn't a small quilt.
No, it measures 45 by 72. It's just large enough to cover a soldier or a Marine.
And you have, and your friends and volunteers haven't made just a couple, you've made lots.
Yes, we've made over 1,800.
1,800 quilts that have been sent overseas for service people. And the beauty of these is that they're lightweight and they're not so hot.
Correct. They are of the camouflage fabric so that they can use them outside of their living quarters, and they can use them out in the open on convoys, whatever.
And the issued sleeping bags that all our service people get are not so cool.
Right. They're all heavier, larger, and they are made out of the polyester material, so they are quite hot.
And on your website, you mentioned that people sleep on top of them, underneath them, and also use this as a pillow.
Correct.
But share the story with our viewers how you began making these quilts.
When my son-in-law was told he was going to Iraq in April of 2006, he asked me to make him a quilt, and he said it had to be out of camouflage. And he helped me design it. We went together, picked out the camouflage fabric, and we made it.
So he had the first one, and
Correct.
now 1,800 quilts later, you're getting very inspirational stories.
Yes, I am.
I have a note that I just want to share that just recently posted on your website. A grateful soldier wrote, "I have to admit this is one of the nicest things I've ever received. I plan to keep this with me throughout the rest of my career and beyond. And again, thank you from the bottom of my heart." We wish we didn't have to send these quilts, but people can request them for their loved ones.
Yes. Yes, anybody can contact us, and we give our quilts away free. The only thing they're responsible for is the postage to get it to either them or their soldier or Marine Air Force person.
We do have the Army one that we showed you, but then we also have, this is a Marine camouflage, so you have also the Air Force, which I don't have a sample holding right now, but there are those available, and the 45-inch width is folded into thirds.
Yes.
And you've quilted these in many spots.
Yeah, we do the vertical first, and then we do the horizontal, and then we trim them and put the ties and binding on.
So you have a lot of quilting days.
Yes.
So about how many nights a week do you quilt?
We have our shop open 2 nights a week from, about 3 hours, and then we have it open on Saturdays for 6. And people come and go and do whatever they like to do. We do a whole workshop where we teach them how to do it.
And guys and gals alike.
Yes, we have some men that do so.
Now, you mentioned that you can just request one of these to be sent to someone in your family or a friend, but there's more cost. About $20 a piece is your cost into this.
Yes. The materials cost us about $20, and that's the fabric, the batting, and the thread.
If you go to the sewingwithnancy.com website, then you'll click under Nancy's Corner in the 2300 series. You'll find the Camel Quilt Project website, and then you also can make a donation to your project.
Yes.
To help pay for all these. We wish we didn't have to have them.
Yes. We work strictly on donations, so without the donations, I wouldn't be able to make them.
I'm truly impressed on the durability of this and the size of them. 72 inches, 6 feet long, can cover a lot of area.
Yes.
They're very workable. So not only do they make the bags or the quilts, but then this is very clever.
Yes, that's what we call a cool tie.
A cool tie.
It's 45 inches long, and it's got 4 sections. The 2 center sections have what we call soil moist crystals in them.
Right.
It's about a half a teaspoon. They get soaked in water, and then they puff up, and they keep the soldier's carotid artery cold. Cool.
Clever. So this goes along with each camel quilt.
Yes.
Well, inspiring, You started this 3 or 4 years ago. I'm impressed, and we'll keep in touch to see how your program progresses.
Thank you.
Thank you for being our guest on Nancy's Corner. And thank you for watching Sewing with Nancy during this 3-part series on applique know-how. We took a little different approach during this series. I worked with a program of samples, making different ways of featuring an applique, from the basic to very creative. I hope you'll give some of them a try. But most of all, thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Nancy's fully illustrated applique know-how workbook includes laminated instructions for all the techniques featured in this 3-part series. It's $19.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2314. Order item number BK2314, applique know-how. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at sewingwithnancy.com for more information on this program. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Cabinets, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Classe Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Rowenta. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.